Thank you, Dana. This is a pleasure for me on many levels to be addressing individuals across the country engaged in urban and community forestry efforts, as well as research in those areas. I, as the director of EPA's Urban Waters Program and a proud member of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership, I have the privilege of working with citizens across the country, people working on their neighborhoods, working to not just improve their local natural resources, but also their local economies and to make their communities stronger. In that endeavor, what I have found across the board is that for these individuals, whether they're mayors, citizens groups, NGO leaders, or people who are from the private and business sectors, one common theme is that urban forestry seems to be this secret, really well-kept secret in many of these circles, and we'd like that to change, of course. So I would like to invite all of you to think of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership as a chance to have thousands of new people understand the really heroic work that all of you are doing and how it can make the lives of Americans and others far better than their lives are today. I say that with no exaggeration whatsoever because I myself had no idea, for example, what the Forest Service and its partners were doing in the area of urban forestry, even though I'd been in the natural resources arena for decades, as Dana described. So that's an invitation to all of you to really see this as an opportunity to lift your work up, to be of use to people that you maybe didn't realize could benefit from your work. With that said, I'd like to just give a brief overview upon which my colleagues, Sarah and Tracy, will talk about. The brief overview about the federal partnership, I'd like to just really start with this first screen that you see of all these great logos. And I'd like to think that there might be at least one logo that you may not know, maybe more, but for me, again, as a federal employee, it's shifted my identity from being an EPA employee to being really of federal service to the American public. So you can see that now, through this partnership, we can access maybe some folks we hadn't thought of before, the Department of Transportation, HUD for housing and affordable housing issues. And one group I'll call out in particular that you may or may not be familiar with is the National and Community Service, the Corporation for National and Community Service, which is the agency that runs the VISTA, AmeriCorps, and some of the other Learn and Serve programs. I just wanted to take a look at these logos and invite you again to think about which of these groups have you not worked with, and where are you working in the country where some of them or even their research arms may be able to be of assistance to you or take your work to new audiences. The next thing I'd like to point out in the next slide here is that there are several people who have been instrumental in this work, and they are people from all of these agencies, but they're also, if you think about each of these agencies, have their natural partners, whether they're NGO partners, state organizations, research organizations, or implementers. So again, I'd like to let you look. If you don't know the logos, you'll see at least the acronyms on the right-hand side, that within the federal family, we've come together with a shared goal. And you see a couple of things. There's a full vision, mission, and principles that you can look at on our website, urbanwaters.gov. But the idea here was recognizing that across America there were places near water that really had become degraded, that as Americans, we had turned our back on some of these waterways, where previously these were the places that we had settled. These were the places that communities had established themselves. These were the places where people were playing, working, founding their industries, getting baptized. These were places that, frankly, Americans have written folk songs about. So really treasured places, but over the decades they became degraded. I think many of you probably can recall by name a place that you know that over the decades became degraded, and now there's clearly an upsurge of people interested in restoring these places. And at EPA, in the Office of Water, I think about how they want to restore their treasured, iconic urban waterways. But as you know, in water, we think about these places as watersheds, and the forests are a vital part of the restoration process, not just from an ecological perspective, but also from a human perspective. People treasure having green space. People treasure their trees, just as they treasure their waterways. So we see it almost as impossible to do this water work at EPA without the assistance and active partnership of people working on urban and community forestry. In the next slide, I wanted to point out here that we have a lot of different places that we are working. So we've taken both a national and a place-based approach to this work. While the map on the left may be difficult to read, we've highlighted the states where we're working on the left. There are 19 locations where we decided to put our collaboration to the test, and really these are what we think of as learning laboratories. These are places where in some cases the Forest Service is the lead, in some cases EPA or Department of Interior, or the Army Corps of Engineers might be the lead, NOAA, but in any case the idea is not that the lead agency is doing everything, but rather facilitating the active engagement, again, not just of the federal agencies, but the NGO partners, the local partners, in some cases elected and appointed officials. So if you can picture your work and see if they occur in any of these 19 locations, I'd encourage you to find out on our website actively who is it that you could contact if you're not already involved in those places. At this point, it's also good for me to say, what if you're not in one of those 19 locations? And we are working right now to have a process through which others may be able to become engaged. We already have a partnership handbook, and there's a link for that, I believe, on the last slide. And that was formalized because there was so much demand across the country to make sure that we formalize what we've learned in these 19 places. And so there's an urban waters approach formalized in the handbook, and we've provided that to all communities in America so that could be used as a roadmap, if you will, to help your community engage more federal and other partners. On the next slide, you'll see we're talking a little bit now, not just about what we do and where we do it, but plunging in a little bit about how this partnership got started. So about 7 years ago, we brought together a number of agencies. At the time, it was 11 agencies. And we found that when you work in urban areas, there are many agencies that the public's not familiar with, certainly not those organizations actively working on natural resource work. I think that what we heard from a lot of our community members in urban areas is they were used to maybe having figured out the maze, and you see the maze over there on the slide, that is, say, EPA's Office of Water. But for them to access our brownfields program, our environmental justice program, our smart growth program, just took more capacity than some of these small groups have. So imagine their challenge when they're working in urban areas and there are so many agencies they're not even familiar with. So they did request that EPA join with others to create this federal partnership to be responsive to the community leadership in these areas to restore natural resources, but also to restore the communities and revitalize them. On our next slide, I continue with this story, and I have to say we were delighted last month when Harvard University's Professor Steve Kellman became aware of the partnership through a friend and colleague in the Forest Service, and that's Alice Ewan of the state and private work in the Forest Service. And through Alice, they became aware, Harvard University professor became aware of this, and there's a blog that he has done about the partnership. I encourage you to go there because he really identifies what is it that makes this partnership work. So he talks about the fact that Congress has given authorization to each federal agency to do different things. So for example, we have a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, which again, there's a slide at the end here. And Forest Service is able to plant trees and work with communities to fund the planting of trees. If EPA Office of Water did that, Congress has not given us the authority to do that, but we're allowed to bring the community together and fund the planning, the training, and so on. So when you bring together the Forest Service authorities with the EPA authorities, we actually have a combination that allows communities to do the training, convening, gathering, planning, and then actually implement the planting and care of trees in that watershed. And finally, on the next couple of slides, you'll see we have been cited as having an innovative culture. That's not just talking about the feds, but all of you that are not feds that work closely with us. And finally, I've got a slide here about the different ways that you can get involved. I encourage you to come back to the slide after you've heard from Sarah, where she'll do a deeper dive into some of the work that's happening across the country, and then from Tracy, where she does an even deeper dive in one place, where she's working as the Urban Waters Ambassador in the Green-Duwamish Watershed. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Dana.